So, Andrew Tate has made a pretty shocking prediction about the future of the West, especially after some recent, really intense political events. In this explainer, we're going to break down his argument step by step to see exactly how he gets there.
And there you have it. Civil war is coming. He's not saying it might happen, he's saying it is happening. So the big question is, how? How does anyone arrive at that conclusion? Let's unpack his chain of thoughts.
Okay, so before we dive in, let's be super clear. Our job here isn't to take a side. We're simply going to map out his argument as he presented it. And for him, it all starts with what he calls a dangerous new culture popping up in politics. All right, so the first part of Tate's argument, he basically kicks things off by saying that the political vibe has gotten, well, it's crossed a really dangerous line. He thinks it's not just about disagreeing anymore. It's escalated into something way, way different. And he doesn't just pull this out of thin air. He points to what he sees as hard evidence. He'll bring up the threats against commentator Charlie Kirk and then connect that directly to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. He even digs into polling data that suggests, shockingly, that a lot of people are okay with violence against figures like Trump or Elon Musk. For Tate, these aren't isolated incidents. No, he sees a pattern, and he's calling it an assassination culture.
And this right here is a really critical piece of his logic. He argues that, look, the only reason we're not all physically fighting is because we can still talk. We can have a discourse. But, and this is the key, in his eyes, that option is gone. It's off the table. Which, of course, leads to the next question. Why? Why is it impossible to talk anymore?
Okay, so let's move on to part 2 of his argument, the end of discourse. This is where he explains why he believes that real, meaningful debate between people who disagree, well, it's just not possible anymore.
And he really sums up his whole frustration with this one question. How can I have political discourse with these people? You can hear it in the question, right? He's basically saying the problem is beyond normal debate. How are you supposed to reason with someone who, in his view, isn't arguing in good faith to begin with?
So he breaks it down like this. He sees this huge, unbridgeable gap. On one side, you have what he calls the rational view. It's based in logic. You operate in a shared reality. But on the other side, you've got this corrupted view. He says it's like a totally false worldview, so detached from facts that it's like trying to argue with someone who doesn't believe in gravity. It's not just a disagreement on policy. He's saying they are literally living in two different realities.
And this quote really drives that point home. They don't have respect for a differing opinion. They don't have respect for anything. See, he's not just saying, oh, they don't like my ideas. He's making a much bigger claim, that they have zero respect for the whole concept of debate, maybe even for basic human dignity. So if you can't have a real conversation, what happens next? Well, according to Tate, this whole situation leads to a really complicated, kind of dark paradox, especially when it comes to a core Western value, free speech. Okay, so here's the paradox as Tate sees it. He's saying, hey, free speech is great, but it only works when we all agree on some basic ground rules, on a basic reality. The moment that shared reality shatters, he argues, free speech stops being a tool for finding truth. Instead, it just turns into a weapon, a tool to stir up hate and incite violence. And he actually lists what he thinks those foundations are. For free speech to work, he says you need a shared view of history, a shared idea of what a successful society looks like, a shared definition of family. Basically, you need shared parameters for existence. And his whole point is that the West has lost all of that. And because of that loss, free speech is no longer a net positive. It's actually doing damage. So this all builds to what he presents as a really stark choice, a huge trade-off. He holds up the West, like the US, on one hand, and a place like Dubai on the other. He says, look, the West has free speech, but it's getting unsafe and it's completely falling apart. Dubai? Zero free speech, but it's safe, it's secure, there's a strong social order. And he's basically asking, which one do you want? Because you might have to choose between freedom and safety.
Okay, so at this point in his argument, there's a real shift. It stops being just political analysis and it gets a lot more personal. This is where we get to the real emotional core of why he's so disillusioned.
Wow, I mean, that quote says it all, right? I am completely heartbroken, not just because of Charlie. I'm heartbroken for humanity. He's taking this way beyond just politics. He's talking about a deep sadness for what he sees as humanity just losing its way. And he gives a few examples of why he feels this way. He'll say, look at Elon Musk. He tries to save free speech with X, and what does he get? Just insults.
Tate says he tries to wake people up, and he gets hate from the very people he thinks he's trying to help. He sees people literally celebrating the downfall of those who were trying to save them. And eventually, he just throws his hands up and concludes, you know what? Some people are just so soulless and so lost.
And he has this whole analogy to explain it. He says a coward in the stands will always laugh when a gladiator falls in the arena. His thinking is that the people on the sidelines, the cowards, they feel bad about not being in the fight. So when they see a gladiator, a public figure, get taken down, they cheer. Why? Because it makes them feel better about their own inaction.
And all of this culminates in maybe his most cynical question of all: do the youth of America even deserve to be saved? I mean, that's where he's at. He's genuinely questioning if the whole fight is even worth it anymore. It's just a total loss of hope.
Which brings us to the final part of his argument. And honestly, this might be the most revealing part of the whole thing. Because after laying out this entire bleak case for why everything is about to collapse, he offers zero solutions.
Think about it. For a guy who's built his entire brand on having all the answers, this is a huge admission. He just says it. For once, I do not have all the answers. I'm stumped. He's basically saying, I see the problem with perfect clarity, but I have absolutely no clue what to do about it.
And from that point on, it's just this barrage of frantic questions with no answers. He starts with this one. What do we do about these people? It's a real challenge, right? What are you supposed to do with a group of people that you believe celebrate your destruction and want you gone?
And then the questions get even more personal, more existential. How do you exist amongst people who want you gone? Suddenly, it's not even about politics anymore. It's about basic survival.
Then he asks, what's the other solution? He's heavily implying that if discourse, if talking, has failed, there has to be something else. He doesn't say it outright, but that question just hangs in the air, pointing right back to where we started, his prediction that war is the only thing left.
And that leads to his final hanging question. What is the political solution to this? By claiming there is no political solution, he basically ends the argument right there. He leaves you to wrestle with this idea of a future where politics just doesn't work anymore.